Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The Arcturus drifted silently through the abyss, far beyond the boundaries of any known star system. Its sleek form glided past dying stars, its hull battered by years of exploration in the uncharted territories of deep space. Inside, the crew of scientists and engineers busied themselves with their usual tasks, unaware that they were about to encounter something that defied the very nature of reality. Dr. Evelyn Cade, the lead scientist on the Arcturus, stood in front of the large observation window in the command center. She gazed out at the endless stretch of stars, the same view she had seen for the past 5 years. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. They were supposed to be on a routine survey mission, but the recent readings had her intrigued. Dr. Cade, "We're picking up something strange on the long-range scanners," said Lieutenant Michael Barnes, the station's chief engineer. His voice crackled over the intercom. "It doesn't match any known celestial body or phenomenon." Evelyn furrowed her brow, tapping a few commands into her console. "Strange how? It's like a hole, but not a black hole. There's no gravity well, no radiation, just empty space where there shouldn't be any." "Show me," she ordered, her tone curious but measured. Within moments, the holographic display in front of her flickered to life, revealing a void in the star map. It was small, barely perceptible at first, but the closer she looked, the more unsettling it became. It wasn't just empty space, it was a rift. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered to herself. The intercom buzzed again. "Want me to change our course to investigate?" "Yes," Evelyn said, leaning forward. "Take us in." The Arcturus adjusted its trajectory, steering toward the unknown rift. For hours, the crew monitored the anomaly, trying to understand what it was. As they approached, more data streamed in and none of it made sense. No energy signatures, no gravitational pull. It was as if the laws of physics didn't apply within the area surrounding the rift. Evelyn's heart raced. This could be the discovery of a lifetime, a gateway to another dimension, or the answer to the greatest mysteries of the universe. But something in her gut gnawed at her. The absence of familiar markers felt wrong, as though they were staring into a void that was not meant to be seen. Finally, they arrived. The rift was enormous, a jagged tear in the fabric of space itself. It shimmered faintly, pulsating with an eerie light that shifted between shades of purple and black. Evelyn stood transfixed by the sight. There was a strange, almost hypnotic beauty to it. "We're getting closer," Barnes called out from the engineering bay. "But I think we should stop here." Evelyn hesitated for a moment before responding. "Hold position. We'll observe from here for now." The crew gathered around the observation windows, marveling at the rift. Some whispered in awe, while others exchanged nervous glances. They had no idea what they were looking at, and that terrified them. Days passed. The team began to record anomalies, minor equipment malfunctions, erratic power surges, strange fluctuations in temperature. The crew started to grow uneasy. The rift wasn't just something to be studied, it was affecting the Arcturus itself. Then the dreams began. At first, they were scattered across the crew, dismissed as the result of long hours and stress. But soon, the dreams became more vivid, more disturbing. Evelyn found herself waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her mind haunted by images she couldn't explain, endless corridors, shadowy figures, and a sensation of being watched. Lieutenant Barnes approached her one morning, dark circles under his eyes. "Doc, I've been having these nightmares. Every night it's the same thing. I'm walking down the halls of the station, but they're wrong, twisted. And there's something in the shadows. I can't shake it." Evelyn's skin prickled. "You're not the only one. I've been having them too, and a few others have reported similar experiences." Barnes' jaw tightened. "Do you think it's related to the rift?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm starting to think we need to be careful." As the days turned into weeks, the phenomena worsened. Objects began moving on their own, strange noises echoed through the station at odd hours, and time itself seemed to stretch and warp in the presence of the rift. The crew was on edge, their nerves frayed by the unexplainable occurrences. One evening, while Evelyn was reviewing the latest data in her quarters, a sudden, violent shudder rocked the station. Alarms blared as the lights flickered and dimmed. She rushed to the command center, her heart pounding in her chest. "Report!" she barked as she entered. Barnes was already there, furiously tapping at his console. "Something just came through the rift." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "What do you mean came through?" "It's like a wave. Some kind of energy. But it's not electromagnetic or anything we can measure. It's something else." Before Evelyn could respond, the lights flickered again, and a cold chill swept through the command center. She turned slowly, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. In the corner of the room, just beyond the reach of the dim lights, a figure stood. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but there was something wrong with it. Its body seemed to flicker in and out of existence, its edges blurry and undefined. Its eyes, or what Evelyn thought were eyes, were two glowing orbs of dark purple light, staring straight at her. Evelyn froze, her breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching. Then, without warning, it stepped forward, its body passing through the console in front of it as if it wasn't even there. "Barnes," Evelyn whispered, not daring to take her eyes off the entity. "Did you see that?" Barnes glanced up, his face going pale. "What the hell?" The figure continued to move closer, its form becoming more distorted the nearer it got. Evelyn backed away, her heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. The walls themselves seemed to bend and twist around the entity, warping reality as it approached. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The command center was silent, save for the distant hum of the station's systems. Evelyn and Barnes stood frozen, too stunned to move. "What was that?" Barnes finally asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know," Evelyn replied, her mind racing. "But I think it's connected to the rift." Over the next several days, the entities began to manifest more frequently. They appeared in different areas of the station, always at the edges of the crew's vision, disappearing the moment anyone tried to get a closer look. Some crew members reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread whenever the entities were near, as if the very air around them became heavier, suffocating. It soon became clear that the entities were more than just ghosts or hallucinations. They could affect the environment, altering the station's structure and even influencing the crew's behavior. Paranoia began to set in. Crew members accused each other of sabotage, convinced that their colleagues were working against them. One night, a violent confrontation broke out in the mess hall. Two crew members, driven to madness by the entities, attacked each other with makeshift weapons, their eyes wild with fear. By the time security arrived, it was too late. Both were dead, their bodies lying in a pool of blood, the twisted forms of the entities lingering in the background, watching silently. Evelyn knew they had to act fast. The rift was expanding, and the entities were growing stronger. If they didn't find a way to close it, the entire station and perhaps even Moria would be lost. "We need to shut it down," she said one evening, addressing the remaining members of the command team. "The rift is too dangerous. It's not just affecting USA, it's spreading. I don't know how far it will go, but we can't let it continue." "But how?" Barnes asked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We don't even know what it is. How can we stop something we don't understand?" "I've been running simulations with Argus," Evelyn said, referring to the station's eye. "If we overload the reactor, we might be able to create a controlled explosion strong enough to collapse the rift." "That's suicide," Barnes replied, his eyes widening. "If we blow the reactor, the entire station will be destroyed." "I know," Evelyn said softly, "but it's the only way." The room fell silent after Evelyn's words. Barnes looked down at the console, avoiding her gaze. No one wanted to voice the reality they all knew was unavoidable. The station had become a trap, a prison for the surviving crew. and the entities had made sure there was no escaping the influence of the rift. The only choice was to destroy everything at the station, the rift, and themselves along with it. Barnes finally spoke. "We'll need time to prepare. The reactor's been unstable since the last surge. It might not give us the control we need for a precise detonation." Evelyn nodded. "We don't need precise. We need final." She felt the weight of her own words settle in the pit of her stomach, heavy with the realization of what she was asking her team to do. "Make it happen. However long it takes. Just a broken bar, make it happen." Barnes left without another word, and Evelyn was left alone in the command center. The familiar hum of the ship's systems, once a comforting background noise, now felt ominous, as if even the machinery knew what was coming. She sat in silence, staring at the starfield outside, wondering if anyone would even know what had happened here. The rift had cut off almost all communication with the outside universe. They were alone, and no one was coming to save them. Time blurred as the preparations began. The few crew members who were still capable of functioning worked tirelessly alongside Barnes, recalibrating the reactor, modifying circuits, and bypassing fail-safes designed to prevent exactly what they were about to attempt. Every now and then, a dark figure would flicker at the edge of their vision, vanishing before they could react. The entities weren't done with them yet, and Evelyn feared they never would be. She didn't sleep. None of them did. The entities had made sure of that. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw twisted versions of her life via her past, her failures, her fears. In her nightmares, she stood before the rift, watching it widen, helpless as the entities poured through and devoured everything. Her colleagues, her loved ones, herself. They were consumed, erased from existence, and she was left standing alone in the dark. It was only a matter of time before the hallucinations began to bleed into reality. Evelyn was sitting in the mess hall when she saw her father, a man who had died over a decade ago, standing at the far end of the room. His expression was one of disappointment, just as it had been when she had failed her first major exam in college. He said nothing, but his presence was enough to dredge up all the guilt she had buried over the years. He was a ghost of her own making, summoned by the entities to torment her in her final hours. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the vision away, but when she opened them, he was still there, standing in the same spot, staring. "Go away," she muttered under her breath, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. But he didn't move. He just stared, his eyes boring into hers, the weight of his unspoken judgment pressing down on her. A hand on her shoulder snapped her out of the trance. It was Barnes, looking as haggard as she felt. "It's ready," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The reactor's set. We can initiate the overload whenever you're ready." Evelyn stood, shaking off the lingering remnants of the hallucination. "And the others?" "They're waiting in the control room. They know what's coming." "Good," she said, though it didn't feel good. Nothing felt good anymore. She followed Barnes down the long, dimly lit corridors of the station, each step feeling heavier than the last. The walls seemed to shift and bend as they walked, the entities making their presence known, warping reality in ways that made her feel like she was walking through a nightmare. They reached the control room, where the last remaining crew members were gathered. The air was thick with tension, but there was no more room for fear. There was only the task ahead, the final act that would put an end to the rift and the horrors it had unleashed. Evelyn took her place at the console, her fingers hovering over the controls. One button press, and it would all be over. She glanced around at her team, at the faces of the people who had been her family for the past 5 years. Some of them were too far gone, their eyes vacant, their minds broken by the entity's relentless assault. Others, like Barnes, still clung to some semblance of sanity, though she could see it slipping away with each passing moment. She took a deep breath. "We've all seen what's out there. We know what it's done to us, and we know what it will do if we don't stop it here. This is the only way." No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. She pressed the button. The reactor began to hum, a deep, resonant vibration that rattled the walls and sent a tremor through the floor. The countdown appeared on the screen, 5 minutes until total overload. "Move to the escape pods," Barnes said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "We can still eject before the detonation." But even as he spoke, Evelyn knew it was a lie. There was no escape. The entities wouldn't let them go, and even if they could, there was nowhere to run. The rift had grown too large, its influence too strong. It would follow them wherever they went, consume them no matter how far they fled. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the station into darkness. The only light came from the flickering displays on the consoles and the pulsing glow of the rift outside the observation windows. The entities were angry. They could feel what was coming, and they weren't going to let it happen without a fight. Evelyn felt the cold seep into her bones, a chill that went beyond the physical. The air around her grew thick, suffocating, and she could hear the whispers again of those same insidious voices that had plagued her nightmares. They were louder now, clearer, speaking in a language she couldn't understand but somehow felt in the deepest parts of her mind. Her vision blurred as the entities began to manifest, their forms taking shape in the darkness. They were more solid now, more real, their glowing eyes fixed on her. One by one, they stepped forward, surrounding the remaining crew, their presence warping the space around them. Barnes stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. "We're not going to make it." Evelyn didn't respond. She couldn't. The entities had her locked in place, her limbs frozen, her mind trapped in a cycle of fear and despair. The whispers grew louder, drowning out everything else, until all she could hear was the relentless drone of their voices, pressing in on her, suffocating her. The countdown continued, each second ticking away like a death sentence. In the chaos, Evelyn's mind found a moment of clarity. She realized something the entities had been trying to hide from them all along. The rift wasn't just a tear in spacia, it was a doorway, and the entities were using it to feed on their fear, to grow stronger with every passing moment. The only way to stop them was to sever the connection, to close the door once and for all. Her hands moved on instinct, reaching for the emergency override on the console. The reactor was primed for a detonation, but she needed to direct the explosion. She needed to force it into the rift, to use the energy to collapse the tear between dimensions. With trembling fingers, she activated the override. The entities screamed, a deafening, inhuman sound that reverberated through the station. They surged forward, desperate to stop her. But it was too late. The reactor exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave tearing through the station, obliterating everything in its path. The rift shuddered, then began to collapse in on itself, pulling the entities back into the void from which they had come. The last thing Evelyn saw was the rift imploding, its dark, malevolent presence disappearing into nothingness. And then there was silence,